Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's on, it's going, and we can just kind of go from there. So, okay. Does everything look okay? Like everything's fine on your end. I did my background on my end, and let me hear you talk. I just want to make sure the sound is good.
Yeah. Everything looks fine on my end.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go
Do
with
you
Tess,
have
by the way.
do you have something you're speaking into,
I
or
just got the
just the,
computer. I found that my AirPods weren't so good. I had troubles with them. So
you
I
did?
think this is the
Okay.
best.
Only thing I would say, I mean, I'm listening. Let me just turn up my volume. I couldn't hear you as clearly and as well as I'd like to, but it could be that I just try to say something right now. I just turned up my earbud.
Hey Tess, how you doing?
Okay, good. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear you.
Yeah, sure.
So,
Yeah, no, of course.
and we're going to talk about helping teens find direction, which I'm
Yeah.
excited about.
Yeah, no, it's gonna
Okay,
be good. I'm looking forward to it.
great. All right. And we're going to go for just like I'm trying to keep these a little bit shorter just to help parents so that they're not massively long. So for
Yeah.
about like 30 minutes or so.
Okay, cool.
And then, let's see. And I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm going to do a quick intro. You're going to hear me the way I start to kind of wrap things up is I'm going to say, is there anything you would like me to share?
Yeah.
With the parents that are listening, that kind of thing. And that's kind of like your time to wrap everything up. And then I'll ask you a last question about what you're grateful for. That's my
Cool.
kind of
Yeah.
signature thing I end with. Okay. And I'm still getting myself, I got to adjust it. I'm still getting myself used to, Riverside. So,
Okay.
all right, we're ready. And by the way, everything, as you know, we can edit things.
Yeah, cool.
My awesome editor will just take it out of there if it doesn't work or we need to do it again. That's happened with guests, which is totally fine. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. Hi everyone. Welcome to actually I'm gonna stop. Hold on, Sripada. I'm telling her that because I'm gonna redo something. I'm trying to make a couple changes to my podcast about my intro. So I'm gonna say dear parents. So hey, dear parents, we are here today with Will Kirsop, who is a teen coach and founder of Many Roads. And he's going to be talking with all of you today about helping our teens find direction, which I'm really excited about. And more specifically, you will hear in this podcast the science behind purpose and why it's so critical for teens' well-being, the practical ways that parents can help teens uncover meaningful goals, how fostering purpose can improve academic engagement, mental health, and resilience, and then stories of examples of teens and discovering their why and then how it changed their life. So welcome, Will, to the podcast.
Thanks, Tess. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm happy to have you. And just really quickly, where are you calling in from, or where are you in the world?
I'm actually in Bali, Indonesia today. So excited it's my morning here, your afternoon. So
exactly. And originally you're from
Sydney, Australia. So Sydney's home. Also have lived and worked in the United States as well.
Wonderful. Okay. So let's get right to it. I'm excited about this. And I know a lot of parents listening are going to want to know, because this is a question I've had many times in my parent coaching practice is, like my kid just doesn't want to do anything. He or she has no direction. I don't know what to do with them, that kind of thing. And this is your arena because you work with teens. So can we get right into, kind of what is the science behind purpose? And why is it so critical for teens' well-being and their motivation?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly a big one. And I always just like to start out as well, just saying a huge thanks to all the parents and educators and everyone tuning in, because just by showing up and listening, you're obviously really dedicated and committed to the teens or the individuals that you're supporting. So look, in terms of the science behind purpose, I guess at its core, and if we look at it from like a literature standpoint, I guess purpose kind of comprises three core things. So one's around like having a personal meaning, two's having a goal orientation, and the third component is like aims beyond the self. So those are really big things. And when I actually think about it from like a teenager standpoint, what we're really trying to do is not necessarily think about this big, lofty, huge purpose goal, but what's actually meaningful and what's actually important to a teenager in their moment to moment and day-to-day life. And I think we all know as adults that can shift, and shape over time. But for teenagers, that could be different things. It can be their social life. It can be their academics. It can be understanding their identity and thinking about their place in the world. So, Tess, what a lot of my work is using a technique called appreciative inquiry. So I'm talking with teens about their strengths. What are those spikes they have? Their skills, their strengths, their interests, and how do those kind of come online, and how do they see themselves in when they're fostering and developing an identity? What are those spikes that they really want to invest in, that they really want to spend more time doing and cultivating? And then how does that ladder up into life as an adult after they finish high school and things like that?
Yes. Can you tell our audience? I just want to make sure. And Will, I'm just going to ask you if you can. Hold on one second. I have everything turned up. I can't hear you like as loudly as I'd like to. That's the only thing.
More. Yeah.
So I just ask you to do that only because it has happened. It's rare, but I don't want to get to the end and then my podcast editor say, "Oh, we could barely hear him."
Yeah, I can speak up. No problem.
Okay, that's good. That would be cool. Because I think because you're speaking the computer, you got to speak like, you have to probably go a little bit louder. I've got a mic 2 inches from me. You've still got a foot and a half or so, or whatever it's from. All right. So I'm going to start right now. So can you, let's talk about, you mentioned the word appreciative inquiry. This is how you do your work. And can you let the parents know what is that?
Yeah. So appreciative inquiry is, at its core, it's really a big focus on strengths. So it's helping a teenager think around what are those spikes. So those skills, those strengths, those interests that they have. So I actually take teens through a number of guided exercises in my practice and in my work. And we'll start by thinking about things like, who are their role models? And then we'll take it a layer beneath that and like, why is that individual or those individuals their role model? So we'll start talking about what are those individuals' competencies, what are those individuals' values, what are the things that they admire in that person? And then we'll actually look at that task and say, those individuals, and in the next task, we'll say, well, what are those competencies do the teen currently have, or what are they looking to actually develop? So usually that's a really good exercise and a good way to think about it. Just in terms of conceptualizing purpose and really thinking a little bit more about strengths, I like to use a little bit of a bowling ball or a bowling alley analogy. So the way I think about it, Tess, is often imagine that, as a family, right? And there's teens or the children. So the family are at a bowling alley. Maybe you're there as a parent coach. I'm there as a teen coach, teachers, all of those people that are, important and guiding a teen in their life. We're all there, right? But once we get to the bowling alley and maybe the shoes are on, the task is actually for the teen to think about what bowling ball they'd like to select. So they might go, and color might be really important to them, and they might decide to pick a blue one or a purple one, or they might decide to pick the really, really big one. And our task as parents and as educators is to really just get the teen to that starting point where they can actually go and select that bowling ball. And I like to conceptualize that as like that spike, that skill, that strength, that interest. And hey, that might be good for a few bowls, and they might realize that, whoa, I've got a really big ball, and it's ambitious, and it's a bit of a moonshot goal, and we might help them go and select the next ball that's more appropriate and fit for size at this point in time. But I think that's really how I like to conceptualize a lot around the work we do with strengths.
That's wonderful. That gives us a good sense of kind of like just starting out, doing that guided practice and figuring out who are your role models. And I'm thinking of this as a fellow parent, as the other parents that are listening out there, kind of, I'm thinking for my 16-year-old son, like I already have an idea of who we'd say, but what are some of the values and skills? I really like the values question because I think that's really important. And when when kids are a teenager, they're going to say a role model, but they're not thinking about the values. They're looking at the outer, right, role model of like, what that person looks like, what they have in their life, as opposed to like, who are they, who are they in the world, and what are their values and how do they kind of live? So I love that you start that way with the teens. What are some kind of practical ways that parents can really help teens, like, uncover some of these meaningful goals?
Yeah, so I think that having discussions of that nature can really help as a starting point. And for a teenager, they're probably not thinking about like, hey, what are my values necessarily?
Right.
But the role model's like a really good way to help them start thinking around what do they actually value? And to your point just there, Tess, often they are thinking about those external metrics of success. They might be looking at the entrepreneur, the sports star, the artist, the musician, those types of things. But then when you can actually peel it back and ask, what do you admire in that person, what do you like in that person, that can help give a really good insight. Obviously, for a lot of parents, sometimes teens don't open up as much as we'd like, and it can take a little bit of time. So I have what I also refer to as a little bit of like my best friend trick. So often, what we like about our friends, our peers, those people that are important to us reflect one of two things, either things that we really like or value in ourselves, or things that we wish we had or we'd like to cultivate in ourselves. So I often encourage parents actually to ask those types of questions. And sometimes I do it in my practice as well, asking those questions so that teens can really think about, well, what do they admire or like in their friends? What are some of those things that they're looking to cultivate? And if, failing that, I actually just ask them to tell me about their best friend. And most of us love just talking about our best friend, what we like about them, why they're funny, things of that nature. And that can be a really cool little way to unlock some insights into a teen, into their psyche, what they're caring about, thinking about, and valuing.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, I can just imagine. I know that I've done this with my teen, and especially when he was, younger years, of talking about when you're in middle school, making friends, and what do you like about those friends? There was so many changes of friendships going on, and particularly in middle school, because most of the kids move to another school, and then they're in with a lot of other new kids. But I like that about, rather than just listing kind of like what you like. Oh, well, they're nice. They're this. They're like that. Tell me about them, and what do you enjoy doing together? And the other question too, and I would imagine you probably get there, but and I know I've talked with my son about this, and I talk with parents about it that I work with. How do you feel when you're around that friend? Because I notice as a parent how my kiddo has like what he looks more anxious around certain kids.
Yeah.
And he looks more comfortable, and he laughs a little bit more with certain friends. And so I think that's another piece there, is kind of like, how do you feel around this friend, that can really kind of get in there with, what the friendship is all about. And then you get to what those, what are the things that you like, and what are the values that you can get to the values question, I would imagine.
Exactly. And just another kind of run on from that, I guess, is I really like how you've actually mentioned that around feelings, because sometimes the conversation can then go, well, and, in the mid to later teen years where some of the, persuasions of adolescence come online a little bit more. It's like, hey, is that a friend that you're able to trust when you might be put in, a challenging or a potentially compromising situation? Is that someone who will stand up for you? Is that someone who will show up for you? Because, obviously, different things can happen, and we can all be put in different situations. So it's starting to help them think around, well, how are they actually going to mobilize themselves and their social resources in those times where, they may need to stand up for themselves or for someone else, or, say no to something.
Absolutely. Definitely. And, that does tend to happen a little bit later, right? They kind of gain a little bit more insight about how that kid's going to respond, or what they're going to kind of do, as opposed to like when they're younger, they like a playmate who likes the same things they do, as opposed to, there's, it's much more nuanced. I'm noticing that as my own teenager gets older. Okay, what are some other ways? So I like that. That's the best friend trick, right? That's a practical way that parents can kind of get in there and have that kind of conversation. What else?
So I always am really encouraging of like reflective exercises and writing exercises. So one thing I like to guide teens through, and for parents to consider, is whether it's suggesting teen journal in their own just private time, but with reflective writing, I actually have some prompts that I like to use. So we'll definitely go through the strength side of things and talking about what's something you're proud of, what's an accomplishment, what's an achievement. And this can totally be, for parents listening in now, like this can totally be a dinner conversation or a car conversation. And obviously it's probably about picking your moment for the right time. But one on the other side of that, though, I actually really like homing in and talking about like challenges or adversity, and thinking about resilience with teens as well, because it can always surprise us, some of the different things that they go through that they find challenging, or something that they've overcome. It can be anything from social pressures to overcoming or still going through test anxiety. It can be anything of any nature. But what I ultimately find, and when we go through these reflective exercises, it's really encouraging, because they're like, it's actually really good getting out of my comfort zone. And I actually grew a lot. And,
Mm-hmm.
This, I guess, from a developmental psychology standpoint, around this mid-teen year, that's when they're starting to think around, themselves, their place in the world, and then they can start looking backwards and reflecting on those growth exercises. So that's something that can work. And whether it's in sport, academic, social life, it doesn't necessarily matter the avenue, but it can definitely be something that teens get a lot out of, I tend to find.
Yeah. So checking in with them and just, I'm even thinking making it more, parents, I mean, having a sit down face-to-face conversation, like we're going to have a reflective exercise right now is not going to work with your teen. So having it at dinner, just casually or in the car, and parents ask me all the time, like, I don't know how to have that conversation or when, but I like that you said that it can happen in the car. So many good conversations happen in the car, but about their, things that are challenging them and what are some things that have happened, and especially as they do get a little bit older. I think high school, I see there's more reflection on who they are and who, because they actually have years behind them, right? Like, whereas they're starting sixth grade, you don't have a lot, you're not reflective at that point, and you also don't have a lot of years literally of your life that's it behind you. You start to get that by 14, 15, 16, for sure, by the end of high school. So that's great. Okay.
Yeah.
Those reflective conversations, right?
And just to double click on that a little bit more in
Yeah,
terms
sure.
of, when to have the conversation. And I think for us as adults, we obviously, sometimes you want to sit down and have a face-to-face conversation and look your, your like son or daughter in the eye in this instance and have that conversation. But that's not always going to be meeting them where they're at, right? And sometimes it can be maybe a little bit easier in those like low touch tech environments where maybe there's a little bit of passive scrolling going on, or maybe you're watching something together, or they're in the car and maybe they are looking on their phone. And I'm not an advocate of by any stretch of the imagination of multitasking or devices, and that's a whole different thing we could have a conversation on. But sometimes when you're just starting and we're at the tip of the iceberg with these conversations and it's the first time, and maybe it's if you're a teen, someone who's not necessarily prone to opening up, that might be just something to consider, to hope like grease the wheels just a little bit in those initial conversations.
Absolutely. And I have, I've noticed, I don't, again, I don't advocate that as well. Like having them sit and scroll on their phone as they're, cause you're also trying to teach them to be present when you're having important conversations. But you also can see if they're in the car, and I just say, my son will have, there's music on in one earbud, but one's out. And you can kind of get in there, and there are times, and if I sort of like you choose to kind of let certain things go, and you just let that piece go, because the conversation you want to have and ease into here around reflection can happen. It kind of puts them in a little bit more control, as opposed to saying, I need everything off. I need you staring me in the face, looking right at me. The teenagers do not want to do this. So it's a way to get
and
in
I'm
there.
just jumping in there as well. Like I've definitely found that a bit in my practice as well. Like when I've done in-person sessions, like it actually can be more challenging for them, because we've just got to understand their lineage, right? Like a lot of these teenagers went through the flip-flop of online and offline schooling with COVID, and they used to Zoom and all of these different things. So it's just trying to meet them where they're at, and having the different conversation of obviously about devices and things is very important. And I'd say that almost every parent's talking to me about it. But just in terms of greasing the wheels in this nature can be helpful.
Definitely. Any other ways that you want to suggest to parents to kind of
look? Those are
cover
probably the main ones.
Okay.
I think that in terms of the appreciative inquiry can be really valid. So it's having those conversations, and I think from a parent standpoint, when we're talking about appreciative inquiry, like we've talked probably about the role model things, but it could be having those conversations around whether it's. And as parents, you'd probably have a little bit of an insight into what some of those spikes might be. So it might be, hey, why do you think you're so good at sport or music or art or drama or math, whatever the conversation may be. So it can just be starting actually from a point of having that conversation around that spike that the parents identified, and maybe being a little bit more leading in that direction. And then it can move into, okay, well, like, what do you see in terms of us in the teen here? Your interest in developing and cultivating, like what are you looking to double down on? Where do you think you'd like to possibly stretch or challenge yourself? So I think that can typically be a really good way to as an entry point as well.
Excellent. Yeah, those are great. Okay, how about fostering purpose, and how can this help us? How can it help the teens with their academics, mental health, resilience?
Yeah, so there's actually a ton of science behind purpose, which
Yeah.
is really encouraging. So like just to what you've said there, Tess. So it's like it's associated with things like happiness, resilience, subjective well-being, psychological well-being,
Mhm.
positive affect, and life satisfaction, right? And then on the other side of things, a lack of it is actually it tends to be like associated with psychological suffering. So it definitely is something that's really important. And I think
Yeah.
for teenagers, they're going through these different shifts with their identity, trying to figure out who they are, who they want to become, what they want to be. Like they're naturally going through things of this nature. So it's about helping them, work towards something that's personally meaningful. And we've
Mhm.
highlighted the definition of that standpoint, but it's something that's kind of meaningful to them in the present moment. This isn't
Yeah.
necessarily about thinking 5-10 years down the track. Like that's so distant for, let's say, a 15-year-old, right? That's not what we're talking about here. And I always think about, Dr. David Yeager and his work in 10 to 25, where he talks a lot of things for a teenager around like status and respect. So it's like, how do
Mhm.
they generate and how do they cultivate some status and respect in their own environment? Um, what
Mhm.
based on whatever that interest that or that driver is that they have. So that's how I often tend to think about purpose. And then teenagers are actually, interestingly, they
Mhm.
still are really interested in quite normative goals. Like they're thinking
Yeah.
about things like having families, having careers. It's not all wild and out there. So those are definitely some of the conversations, and it's helping them think about how do they mobilize and work towards that into their future. And that's how purpose can often come online.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is I know that there's a lot of science around purpose, right? Purpose and meaning. And it's almost becoming from what I read out there, just little bits and pieces and articles, that it's almost like more important than just this piece of like follow your passion. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Just I mean, of yes, it would be great to be super passionate about the your where you're going,
yeah,
but having purpose and having some kind of meaning behind what you're doing, no matter what that is, in whatever realm that is, right? Whether that's doing well as a singing or dancing in a play or playing baseball or whatever it is, right? There's kind of, you can find purpose in everything that you're doing. And even having discussions or just around the general, as parents,
yeah,
we can have discussions around our own ideas and thoughts around purpose and what that is. And do we have our, I mean, I've talked to my son about this, where I've talked about, I really feel like the work that I do, I really feel honored to do it, that there's a lot of purpose and I'm serving other people. And I've talked about the importance of, it's my value. I'm his mom, so I can say it,
yeah,
right? This having a purpose has also it lends to a much happier, positive
yeah.
sense of well-being. So again, it of course helps our mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing as well I probably didn't touch on there is purpose
Yeah.
is also related to like academic engagement and performance as well. And I'll get to that. And like an example of how I try and
Hmm.
conceptualize that. Let's say that when I'm having career conversations with students and they're starting to think
Yeah.
about the future. So let's say they're really interested in STEM and maybe they want to become an engineer. So
Hmm.
we might talk about, well, hey, that's why, grade 9 trig's quite important. And maybe you want to join the robotics team because that's how we actually can have something in the moment that's really valuable, and aligned to this team in terms of where they're seeing themselves in the future. Or on the other side of things, when, they might want to be in a quite persuasive role. So it might be a business role where they're thinking about sales. They might be a lawyer. And it's like, well, hey, this is why we're
Hmm.
reading the classics and Shakespeare in English, because you actually need to develop an argumentative
Yeah.
essay, or you need to be able to develop persuasive speech to be able to convince people to do something, or to work towards an outcome and engineer an outcome. So that can be really helpful in getting teens online with these things, because
Yeah.
as they start thinking about some future goals, it actually grounds them in the present and helps them open up what they can focus on in this short term. And maybe just taking a little step back in terms of just thinking about
Hmm.
purpose. Some of the work that really influences what I do in my coaching practice, and this is really relevant for all parents. And I use a technique called life crafting. It's an evidence-based technique that's come out of the University of Rotterdam by Dr. Michaela Skippers and Nicholas Ziegler. And effectively, life crafting probably has its name on the label a little bit. It's thinking about how do you cultivate a life that's purposeful and meaningful for you. So I tend to distill it into 4 stages. And yeah, anyone could do this. I think it's really relevant for teens. It's relevant for people at retirement age even, and so stage 1 is discovering values and passions. And we probably talked a little bit about that already today. So thinking about those role models and having discussions on that nature. Secondly is thinking about an ideal future life. So how do we work towards teenagers thinking about what's important to them? So it's social, emotional, financial, work. How does that all stack up? Thirdly is then moving into goal setting. And that can be the last example there of, if they want to be the aspiring lawyer, well, now let's think about how do you write a really awesome persuasive argument in an essay. And then fourthly is like a public commitment to the goal. So how do they stand up and often to parents or guardians and having that conversation around like, this is what I'm working towards and things like that. So that's how, that's heavily influenced my work and how I actually work with teenagers. But I think it's really important probably for parents to think about is how can you actually see like a bit of progress along those 4 stages. So again, just to recap, it's thinking about 1 is values and passions, 2, ideal social life, and thirdly, goal setting, and then fourthly, committing to the goal.
Oh, that is great. I love that. I didn't know about that. I do some of that in my coaching, but I don't have a specific name for it. But I mean, obviously life crafting, right? Crafting a life, but discovering kind of what is the passion or where are the interests, right? Kind of going towards there or what you may be good at. And then looking at an ideal future life.
Yeah.
And it just, even if they have no idea, I would imagine, right? You're working with them, Will, to like, engage this kind of muscle, so to speak, in their brain, just starting to think about being out of the home and being, whether it's in college or in a job or maybe getting married or maybe having their own kids. I know that seems so far-fetched, and it does. I remember this myself, but for a 16, 17-year-old for sure. But it gets those wheels turning for our kids, right? I would imagine, to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing is they are thinking about these things at 14, 15. I've found that they, like I've had a student, he say like, I just want to be like a family man. I think that's amazing. They're thinking about this at an early age. And when we start thinking about that ideal future life, an example lately that I've been thinking about or going through in one of my engagements is a teenager. He's thinking about both like a finance and an engineering pathway, right? And we're discussing them and having these conversations around it. But when we've had the conversation about like work-life balance, and it's like, well, hey, if you take a finance role, he's thinking about things like venture capital. It's like, well, these might be the hours. Whereas in engineering, it might be a little bit more geared to, a bit more of a 9-to-5 type role, or, there might be a significant delta, let's say, in the amount of work, amount of total hours each week. And that's been really interesting for him because he's starting to think about, well, hey, what's the life that I look at? Like, he's identified goals of, okay, I want to, have time to wind down after I get home from work and things like that. So it's actually really helpful for them to think about that now. And another conversation I like having at this juncture as well is actually asking teens, like, when do they think it's appropriate to transition to independence and move out of the home? And I know a lot of teens obviously leave college, right? But when can they actually step out onto their own 2 feet? And maybe, every family is different, but when are they working towards their own financial independence? And it's a really interesting conversation at this point because they're talking about things like cost of living crisis, like housing affordability, but it's starting to put a little bit of a seed in their mind at say 15 or 17 of, okay, well, I actually maybe don't want to live with my parents or my, forever. And helping them start to think around, okay, well, it actually is a goal to stand up on my own 2 feet. So I think that and parents, you can have those conversations as well because, another segment of my practice is some of those young adults who are actually challenged and struggling with that transition to independence. So parents of youngest teens and even, you can start having those conversations now and start, I guess the sturdiness around that as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I really like that. And you could see from my face, those of you not watching, but but like kind of, I've had that conversation, and I think it's great to have it with kids that are even younger, not just right before they're about to leave, but when do you think you'd like to leave, and how far would you like to go from home, and what is that going to look like? And doesn't have to be, even though there is a reality out there for a lot of us parents about the financial place and just where you're going to live, how are you going to afford to live, all of that. But it's more than that. Kind of, there are also a lot of kids, I think, that aren't ready, and I don't even know if they even want to say that they're not ready. Because again, I've had a lot of young adults in my practice working with families that have young adults, and there is a lot. I mean, I'm sure as well, Will, a lot of young adults are really struggling to kind of, I'm going to just use this term, but do the adulting. And it's no blame. There's no blame. No. It's just a matter of just, figuring out some areas, whether it's a significant mental health thing or kind of a family thing or something that happened, that they're really struggling to kind of be out fully on their own. It takes a bit.
Yeah, it definitely can. And, some label it as failing to launch and things like that. But I think, Tess, increasingly, that's been something I've been briefed on. And typically in my work, I tend to see, it tends to be young males who are maybe gaming a lot. Parents are often concerned that they don't have much of a social life. They're possibly not in work, or there's like just no pathway or no clear pathway at that point in time. And that's really like the core of what, I try to do. And what's like, and I'm sure it's the same for you, is it's really about like bringing out those gifts, because everyone has that within them. And a lot of these teens, a lot of these young adults have went through challenging times that are either at, elementary, middle, higher school, or even college during COVID. Things have shaped and shifted a lot. And you can't blame them, because, in 2021, for instance, like the British Council said that 65% of jobs that teenagers will work don't exist. Like that's a pretty hard thing to swallow, right? So, and that's where this practice comes in, because it's like starting to focus on strengths, those spikes, so the skills, the interests, and how do we like cultivate them and build a pathway and develop transferable skills that could be valuable across industries, across domains, across time as well, because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the world's going to look like in, probably a year, let alone 5, 10, 20, right? So that's what can be really valuable. For
Absolutely. And I got to say, I haven't said this yet, but it's hard for parents to have, we're putting things out here today for all the parents to kind of, to try at home and have some ways to have some of these conversations and to get this, kind of helping teens find direction. This is really what the podcast is about today. But I'm going to say it is difficult to do that as the parent, because the teens at this, it's normal, right? They're pushing us away. They don't want to have these conversations with us. And that's why they can go and have the conversations with you, Will.
Yeah. Right? I mean, it works well. And it's interesting. I often work with students at the end of middle school, so often grade 8 or maybe the start of high school in grade 9. And I think that's a fun time, because there's still that like innocence, a little bit of their younger years still online before they're really, wanting to kind of have and show their independence. So, and I think for parents out there, it can obviously be really challenging. I think for all of us, it's just, if we reflect back on our own teen years, they're always marked by complexity. And then we've just got to think like what's been added into the mix for this generation, and things as well, like the social media, AI, all of these different things, instant gratification. It's just a whole new, brave new world for these teens to be facing. So it's self-compassion is the thing that I think about as well.
Definitely. It is a completely, I mean, I've had so many parents too, like you said, it's a completely different world that they're growing up in. And no matter how young you may be, as a parent, the kids that you're raising are just in a very different world. And it really is, it's challenging for parents to like, just get their heads around, wait, I didn't do this. I did this and I was fine. And it's like, it's just different, especially with all the screens and the devices and all of that. And now we just recently, over these last few years, had AI in the mix and what that's going to do. And there's so much complexity and so many different challenges, but to keep going with our conversation about helping our teens
Yeah.
or tweens find direction. So do you have any kind of other examples or stories of teens that you've worked with who have discovered their why and kind of how it changed
Yeah, I think
their
in
life?
in lots of different ways. So yeah, I've been fortunate to work with quite a broad range of teens. But I think that, you know, what can often come online and early on in my practice, I like to try
Mm-hmm.
and support teens starting to think about career planning. So I take them through some career quizzes and some guided exercises. And what's
Mm-hmm.
really cool off the back of that is that often they kind of have this like aha moment, and we get to this like we're usually screen sharing, and they've got this quiz, and it tends to be on this page they can actually see what their interests are, and they have this aha moment, and we'll like, you know, take a double click on one of the careers, and we'll actually kind of fill out in the workbook that we use just to think about it. So in terms of some teens, like I've probably got lots of examples, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
psychology or medicine or business, but one of the like really cool examples, I've worked with a student and they're very, very business oriented, but they also really, really cared about the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And this was like an example for them to conceptualize, okay, well, I've got this skill, like, or, you know, they've got this deep interest in that, you know, they perform well from, you know, a business standpoint in school and in those types of subjects. But how do they actually bring that online and start thinking around like entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship and working
Mm-hmm.
towards like developing, you know, their own personal projects and everything. So for them, it was like a really good example of how they could see themselves developing their own study pathway into college and really beyond. So that was something from, you know, quite a you know, like a, I guess, a groove perspective in terms of business. And then like, you know, when I've worked with other teens, it's like sometimes it's not as grand, but they're just saying things like, oh, whoa, I've just had like a real light bulb moment there in terms of how they're thinking and they're conceptualizing about their future, and just to help them kind of have that turnkey moment a little bit in terms of some of those understandings of what, you know, careers might entail and how they can actually get after their goals. And when we start talking about goal setting and things like that.
Oh, that's great. That's great to have. I mean, to have the conversations, and I'm going to just say, because I can see you, but with a younger male, you're much younger than I am.
Yeah.
But do you know what I mean? Having the conversation with someone that's not probably their parents' age, or, you know, that piece can really help to have these kind of conversations that you're talking about and taking them through different strengths tests. I'm guessing that kind of thing to kind of figure out like, whoa, wait, maybe I'm kind of interested in this, but I'm also interested in this. And so where can we take this?
Yeah.
Right.
And
kind of like the business and the, you know, the environment.
yeah. So, and I think one thing is what often works quite well is I tend to actually be like somewhere between the teen's age and the parent's age. So there's this nice bridge, and you know, it can obviously can vary a bit, but there's this nice synergy. And one thing, Tess, I probably haven't touched on in terms of my practice is I actually get to work with parents a lot, and I help, you know, I set them tasks in addition to the teen in terms of like embedding the program of life crafting and everything of that nature. And just from you mentioned a minute ago just about how like it's nice to have someone outside the family, and for me, parents often just say like, oh, it's just so nice to have someone else reinforcing what we're saying. And it's funny because it's not that they're not necessarily asking me to say that, but we obviously see things very similarly, but there's just a different tone and maybe a little bit different tenor that can bring that online and have those conversations. And so like a good example, this, you know, one of my engagements, I just got a really cool text from my mum this week saying like, this made my day. And what had happened, quite a bright student. And, you know, because of his academic prowess, he tended to label people as stupid sometimes, or ideas as stupid. And that was something that, you know, the family wanted to kind of work through. And so, you know, it took a while, and I often find it does take a few sessions for teens to work up, but we're coming to the end of our engagement, and we're actually building this reflection for mum and dad. And he listed that he wants to use more analytical terms to describe people rather than the word stupid. So there's so many different things that can get layered in, and that's why getting to collaborate with parents and supporting them, it can be really this vehicle to kind of help not just, you know, academic and purpose and growth of that nature, but also just, you know, just little things we all need to work on in ourselves as well. So that can be a fun part.
That's great. I could completely hear that story, that example of like, everything's just stupid. They're stupid. That's stupid.
Yeah.
Whatever you're talking to me about is stupid, because this is what our tweens and teens do. So that's great. And I do think it helps. I've seen it in my role as well as a parent and family coach, because I'm not only working with the parents, but I also work with the teens.
Yeah.
They're right there sometimes with the parents. And when they hear it from me, it's just like they, or hear it from someone like you, it can really help. It's an outside person. And that's where I do think we as parents, also, I'm a parent to a teen. So it really helps to have other people, other adults in the community, or people that you connect with, or other coaches, or, someone like you as a teen coach, to just support and help in certain areas that, as parents, it's just going to be a little tougher. But I do think we've had a good conversation to get parents going in and around finding, helping teens to find some direction and purpose, because this is really something that we as parents all think about, and it is a struggle. And in and among the, the dinners and the breakfast and getting them out the door and getting the homework done or whatever, it's hard to think about, this piece, which is so, so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So anything else, Will, that you would like to share?
Yeah, I just think off the last point, and to all the parents tuning in, and just like self-compassion is so key. And you guys, like, if you're, listening to this, and you're doing such an amazing job as parents, and you're obviously showing up in such a strong and powerful way. So be super compassionate to yourself, because when we can't be perfect, right? None of us are going to be perfect, but you're obviously doing an amazing job. And at the same time, have compassion as well, and for your teen as well, or your child, because of what, everything that they're going through, from neurological, socially, behaviorally, biologically, hormonally, all these different things. They're going through a cocktail of different things. So I think that compassion is just a really good key, and can unlock a number of things. And then try out some of these techniques, whether it's talking about strengths through appreciative inquiry, whether it's the best friend trick, or just thinking around that kind of bowling ball analogy as well. Those things can really help while having these conversations. And to the last point as well, even if it's not necessarily a coach, like maybe it's a godparent, or it's an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, like there are other people in the family as well who can support, or, in your community, wherever that may be, with some of these conversations in your teens' growth and development, and for them just to have someone in their corner, and to see them in maybe a little bit of a different light, can be really valuable.
Absolutely. I love that. The compassion. That's it's really a point that, it's not even a word that's always in our, it's not in our vocabulary that often as parents to tweens and teens, but compassion, self-compassion, and compassion for your teens and tweens and what they're going through. So important. It's a great reminder. I have one last question for you, Will, and that is, what are you grateful for?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Look, I actually just so really grateful to be doing this work, and because it really does fill me up, and getting to collaborate with families, whether it's working closely with the parents, and also just getting to see teens go through their growth, is just something that really fills me up. So that's something that I'm really grateful for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Tess.
Okay, we're recording right now, right? Yep, I think we are. Okay, so let me just ask that question about where people can find you, because I want to be able to do that. Okay, so for parents that are listening out there, Will, where can they find you? Where's the best place?
Yeah, the best place is manyroads.co, and you can email to me directly at will@manyroads.co.
Okay, wonderful. Cool. And we will have your website and your email right in the show notes. So everything will be right below this episode. So you can go check that out for parents if you're interested in checking out the work that Will's doing.